Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I come from a small town in Nova Scotia. Here are some facts. The entire area was originally native ground, and there is a burial site on the outskirts of the village. There is an only recently discovered burial mound used by settlers 350 years ago, including one woman whose tombstone faces away from the sun and had 3 husbands who all died before her. The village bloomed to a population of about 50,000 during World War II, as it was a staging area for Canada. Curiously, on the oldest version of the map, a gas chamber is included in the shape of an 8-pointed star. A large portion of the military grounds were bulldozed about 40 years ago, and a bunch of trees were planted. They grew up evenly and have been referred to as the dead wood by locals because the trees have created a canopy, but appear to all be dead save the top layer. Beneath these trees, in the center of the forest, is a sewer grate no one is brave enough to open. Most of the teenagers go to a place to drink they believe is an abandoned psychiatric ward from the 80s, when the Canadian Air Force used the remainder of the base. During the 60s and 70s, they put a nuclear bunker in there that can no longer have anything but computers in it, because it's contaminated with asbestos. The village now has a population of many 900 people, and because of the rapid shrinking, there are ruins and abandoned buildings everywhere. While I no longer live there, my mother has been to a funeral every 2 weeks or so for the last several years. The only growth the town has received is an imposing seniors complex inexplicably built right next to the graveyard. One time found a pig's leg in a bag in the river that splits the town in half. There is a place called The Pit, a series of totally filled gravel pits overgrown with vegetation, where you can find an abandoned school bus. There are no cops, but 4 churches on the same road.
Lived in Paducah, Kentucky for a while. There was a nuclear enrichment plant outside the city that nobody really talked about. It was obviously the biggest employer in the area, and the people who worked there made 2 to 3 times the normal food, gas, and lodging wages that most other people had to suffer with. Only thing is, the plant didn't exactly tell their employees what they were dealing with, and the people were developing all sorts of cancers, mostly blood-borne, and dropping dead in their 50s. Their children were being born dead or deformed at alarming rates. The plant finally came under the investigation of the Department of Energy, who found that management was keeping logs on who caught what cancer and what the effect on their families was for decades, all the while protesting that they didn't know it was dangerous. Thousands of barrels of nuclear waste material were thrown into ponds on government-owned wildlife areas without notice. The only precaution were signs that said, "Don't eat the fish you catch here." Eventually, there was a settlement, and the small-town folks were thrilled. A whopping $150,000 per dead body. Pickups and double-wide sales skyrocketed for months. $150,000 per dead body, per dead child, per dead spouse. And then it was over, and the plant continued to enrich not only uranium, but plutonium, to the extent that a man working there popped positive for tritium in his urine. What else is going on in the land of the free and the home of the brave, I wonder?
There is a fruit warehouse here. I worked there on night shift for about a year, and always had this odd feeling like someone was standing close to me. Sometimes people would say they felt like they were being tapped on the shoulder. Other times we would hear weird sounds when all the machines were turned off. This red smog appeared above one of the box-making machines one day and drifted off to the freezer room. I thought it might have been a strobe light, but someone else saw it too. I got laid off last November and did try to ask staff about the place before it was a warehouse, but no one ever knew. A few days ago, I was told that there was an abandoned warehouse with a cellar where the homeless would break into and sleep. No one knew they were there when they decided to tear down the building, and when it was demolished, they realized people had been living in there. That place was the weirdest after all. The machines were powered down. All these weird noises would come from around the place, and it always seemed like there were people present in areas that no one was in.
It's not a cover-up or anything, but I lived in a small town and we had some spooky things to share. There used to be, when I was growing up, stories about this thing we kids called Blockhead. As the story goes, Blockhead was a crazy old man who encased his head in a solid square of metal, only he didn't die and just went crazier. He escaped off into the plains. I grew up in Far East Colorado, so it's basically Kansas too, electric boogaloo. Blockhead was an aggressive creature that lived off of whatever game he could catch, and was wickedly good at killing and smashing things up. Now, there were several signs of Blockhead approaching, most of which I forgot. 1. There will be no coyotes out. Where I lived, there were an assload of them. We would often hop in someone's truck and pop them because they would eat our chickens. 2. There will be no wind. Again, this was strange since my town was a wind tunnel. 3. You will hear a great metal clanking. 4. A dust storm would hover over wherever he appeared. We even had a rhyme for this one. Wind and sand can only bring trouble. Blockhead creeps where the dust storm hovers. There were other signs, but I forgot them. Anyway, we, being young, would often tell tales of Blockhead at sleepovers and whatnot, and he was kind of an urban legend. Being the X-file that I was, I held on to the legends of Blockhead well into high school. And that was when some weird stuff started happening. My junior year of high school, someone attacked my neighbor's dog. And by attacked, I mean that he was torn open all over the place, obviously dead. It was a traumatic sight for me and my neighbor. We all loved that dog, and I'd grown up watching him when our neighbor left. We initially thought coyotes, but they would never screw with something bigger than them that was alive, and they would never come this far into town. Key us hunting for something to kill before we give up and head home. Like I said, we didn't find anything. I was thinking, it's happening, Blockhead is here, but I was just being a panicky coward. That's all that happened that summer. Nobody knows who or what tore up Newton, the dog, that bad. But my neighbor was really torn about it. Then, during the summer of my senior year, something big happened. I remember how there was no wind that day at all, which seemed weird to me. I hung out with some buddies and broke into the local high school. We never did anything bad except that, and even then all we did was wander the halls. It wasn't locked up all that well, and went our separate ways. I could see what looked like a storm moving into town on my way home. The way summer thunderheads get all huge and foreboding but are generally cowardly. So I ignored it and went home. When I woke up that morning, the whole town was going nuts. Someone had come into town and completely trashed our neighborhood. And by trashed, I do mean just that. Car windows were shattered, back fences were splintered. Some even completely destroyed. Yards were torn up, and what was most peculiar were the huge dents on the cars parked on the street. I'm talking like someone must have T-boned these suckers, but somehow didn't trip the alarm. Everyone was blaming it on the storm and drifters from the highway, but I knew better. The wind wasn't blowing at all that day, and there was no storm last night. Regardless, that never occurred again, but now when I'm home for the summer, I'm sure to meet up with my old buddies and talk about this. We don't go far away from town off into the plains, even if we're armed. And night terrifies me more than it should, so I try as hard as possible not to leave the house. And that's my story about Blockhead.
Live in Derbyshire in England, and there's this tiny village built on a single winding road that acts as a shortcut to get off the motorway early. Every autumn they put out these scarecrows in clothes and put them around town, at the bus stops, at the manor, in chairs on lawns. The weird part is during that time they board the church up and leave fruit and vegetables at this old dead conker tree with a goat, horse and crow carved into it. Like realistic red reliefs carved with chainsaw and chisel, not some chicken scratch with a knife. I've gone through around 1 a.m. and seen people in robes. Every Christian church founded there has had some calamity, sunk into the River Trent, burnt down, blown away in a mini hurricane. I'm honestly not a supernatural believer, but this place is like an Iron Age pagan time warp in the modern day. Nobody knows anyone from there. It's a few families in like 200 homes, and they go away for college and then come back and settle there. Lovecraftian is the only term I have for it.
Well, the only thing I can contribute is wildlife officers constantly denying the existence of mountain lions in western Pennsylvania. A few game cameras even have complete proof that they're there, but they outright deny them being here for some odd reason. It just makes me think that there's something else out there that they don't want people to think mountain lions did.
Southwest Virginia here. The local government also says there are no mountain lions around, but I've seen one. I'm pretty sure the denial stems from tourism. You want everyone to come and look at your pretty nature, but no one will come if they think a mountain lion's gonna jump them. Anyway, where I live isn't even really a town. There's a store and a road, and aside from houses, that's about it. Still, weird stuff goes on out here. I've stood at the end of my driveway and watched a UFO hover over the cemetery up the road for 30 minutes. Also heard what I think is a Bigfoot, but my mom thinks it was a demon once, coming from literally right up the hill, and I have more ghost stories than most people have regular stories. Here's one. Living in an apartment, about 10. Road on one side, woods on the other. Me and the other boys who lived there hung out in the woods every day after school. One day we're talking about supernatural stuff. One of the boys mentions a rumor of an old man who lived in the woods. Said he attacked anyone who got on his property. Laugh about it, write it off. Couple weeks later, we're back in the woods. Decide to do some exploring and end up going farther than we have before. We're all laughing and making noise, having a good time. All of a sudden, we all just stopped because it didn't feel right anymore. We start looking around till one of the kids says, "Hey guys," in a really, really scared voice. We all look over and holy shit, old man in the woods. He was wearing those weird golfer caps old guys wear sometimes, a long gray coat and camo pants, carrying a hatchet. But the thing I remember most is his eyes. One of them was more or less normal, if a little squinty. The other, and this may have been my 10-year-old mind overreacting, seemed grotesquely huge, like it was actively popping out of his skull. Before he could say a word or even move, we all turned tail and jetted. Never went back in those woods after that. We did find a meth hangout there once.
Grew up on the edge of Belleville, Ontario. There was a forest behind my house with tons of weird shit in it. Animal drawings carved into trees sporadically. 2 old rusted cars. Looked about 1950s. One with bullet holes, which I assume were from modern hunters. I'm not even sure how the cars got there, because the forest was way too thick to drive the cars through. But the trees looked older than the cars. Random, sliced-up tires scattered around. Some little shack that supposedly had a hermit with a glass eye living in it. I was always too afraid to approach the house, but I did see a man I believed to be the hermit a couple times. Years later, they begin cutting down the forest for new homes. One of the workers is found stabbed to death. Ongoing investigation while the development continues. No charges ever laid. The forest is removed shack, cars, etc. included. Homes built. Never saw or heard of the hermit again. I don't know if he was offed by a cop, a worker, or if he just relocated or what. Not really paranormal, just odd, I thought.
Here goes. Be 19 in Rawalpindi, near Islamabad, Pakistan. Be exam week. Studying to become an engineer. I have a huge math exam on Tuesday. Studyhard.jpg. Monday evening around 8 p.m. so it's dark. The electricity goes out. LOL cause load shedding and horrible infrastructure. Studying outside in the front yard cause it's hot as hell inside. See something lurking over the rooftops. Dismiss it as being some kids just fooling around. The figure keeps standing there like it's staring at me. Quickly read some memorized parts from the Quran out loud. It runs off. Get back to studying, then go to sleep. Wake up for an exam at 4:30 since I have to walk for about 2 hours to get to my uni. Walking through dense bush on an old trail. Almost out of the jungle and reach a small village. See the dark figure again. Looks like a large human, maybe 9 feet tall with super long hard hair. It's standing over in a small plot of farmland. Suddenly jumps up onto the roof of a building that is at least 20 feet away and 10 feet tall. WTF.jpg. Read some stuff again in my head and keep walking. Write the exam and come back home. Everything after I came back is a blur. I don't remember any of it. My mom told me that I was all quiet when I got back and went straight to bed. Then I woke up in the middle of the night and started banging on the door really hard. My 2 older brothers, who are huge, try holding me down, but I shrug them off like it's nothing. They had to call a imam, priest, the next day to perform an exorcism. I had a 110 fever for the next week. Passed the exam with flying colors, and now I'm here. Here's another. B12. Be with cousins screwing around in the forest. Go to the local stream and start swimming since it's almost 35 Celsius outside. Feels good, man. Sun is still up. It's about 3. Everyone sleeps indoors at this time because of the intense heat. People claim that all the jinns, supernatural beings, are out at this time. They tell you to stay away from trees, large bodies of water, and caves. Today we feel ballsy and head over to a small pond. Pond is supposed to be very still, almost mirror-like. People claim it is the house of various beings, good and evil. Try to peer into it, but my older cousin stops us. See some kid walk up to it and try to throw a stone. He picks it up, looks at the pond, and then just stops. Stands there for a good minute. Looks around like he has no idea what the hell is going on. He seems completely lost. His facial expression is similar to the 1,000-yard stare you get from PTSD. He just sits down and stares at the ground. We walk him back to his house. He's very quiet. 2 weeks later, he died of unknown causes. Doctor claimed it was a brain hemorrhage. Moral of the story, stay away from ponds.
I do not have a key for that Greentext arrow, so I'm doing it the lazy way. I was in my early teens while I lived in an Estonian town of Tõrva, population circa 3,000. Me and my 3 years younger brother used to wander around in the woods and the marsh surrounding the town and generally look for things to burn, or just have an adventure like any normal young asshole. It was the 90s. Somehow, we stumbled upon this desecrated, abandoned, beat-up house in the middle of nowhere, beyond the marsh. It had the greatest apple garden plus many blackberry bushes, so we started going there regularly, gathering those sweet apples and berries. We explored the house. It was rather small, one-storied cottage, most of its insides reduced to rubble. The drill was usual: gather the goods and get out of there. The main reason being the place was scary. No wildlife, not even birds, were in that area. It was always absolutely quiet. Instead, there was this eerie feeling of danger every time we were there. We tried to get all our stuff and get the F out as quickly as possible. Then this one time, I went alone. As always, upon reaching the house area, everything seemed to get quiet. Immediately, chills were sent down my spine, but I thought, I'm 13. I'm a big boy. Ha! This doesn't scare me. In my bravery, I decided to check out the house after bagging some delicious fruit. And man, I wish I didn't. The stuff in the place started moving around in a manner you'd see in a poltergeist movie. I booked it out of there in 2 seconds, but it didn't stop there. House was still throwing stuff around, and for the first time there was wind present. Leaves were shaking violently on apple trees. I thought this is the end. Nearly shat myself while running towards civilization. Also, I'd like to add that no one I met during my 7 years of living in that town had either heard of this house or refused to acknowledge its existence. I don't know. Maybe just nobody had been there or ever heard of it.
Live in a pretty small town in Kentucky. Get home a week or so ago with friends. See 4 police cars facing a house that had been abandoned for a few years. They were in the street at the end of the cul-de-sac, their cars facing the house, illuminating it with their headlights. Notice headlights in the backyard, later find out it's a truck. Okay, so I automatically assume that there's someone who's broken into the house and they're shining their headlights towards and inside the house. Make sure if someone darts out or moves near a window, they'll know. But this is where it gets sort of strange-ish. We pull into my driveway. I assume that either what I mentioned previously happened or there was a robbery. In any case, I walk down my driveway and start to approach the police because I figured they'd want to ask me if I'd seen anything lately. Which I had. The old owners had been there a day before cleaning the place, which was surely in an attempt to sell it. So they all look at me. They weren't talking when I walked up, and they continued to not say a word. They got in their cars as soon as they saw me and drove off. The truck that was in the backyard stayed there all night. I'm not sure if anyone was in it, but for an hour I saw the headlights poking out from the backyard, and then I looked out at one point and they were gone. Everything seemed like a pretty normal robbery and investigation besides the truck in the backyard, and the cops just driving off as soon as I walked up, not even glancing at me or speaking to me. Oh yeah, also in Kentucky there are lots of caves. There are 2 we frequent in very small towns, and I've seen some weird things in there. One time we walked in and there were literally thousands, I kid you not, thousands of candles covering the floor. And this is a big-ass cave. They were all burnt out except 2 on top of a hill in the cave. We've also heard faint screams from deep in the cave. Upon investigation, we can be almost certain no one was in the cave due to the fact that we know it very well. Spread out so no one could get by us through any known exit point. And found nothing, yet we can still hear them. Caves are just a scary place to be in general without all that extra stuff.
Live in England. Turn of the century. Local playground by the motorway being overrun by gypsies squatting with their caravans. Walking over bridge across the motorway. See black furred cat the size of a leopard stalking through the tall grass alongside the motorway. Go to meet friends by the river to catch fish. Few hours later, there's a bunch of cop cars there as I walk home. Gypsy woman screaming, "Eat, got my baby!" Cops tell us to ignore them and move along. Go home. Later, Mum tells me to go to the pub on the corner and get my granddad for dinner. A gypsy in the pub drunk crying about something that came out the bushes and at his kid. Parks closed off. Sneak in the next morning with bro's shit is all polished and smells of cleaning supplies. Gypsies are all gone. Grandad ran the only garage and recovery service for miles around, so had an inn with all the coppers, and they can around on their time off to drink beers and shoot the shit. Mention it and ask what happened. They look at each other, then my granddad, then me. "Nothing you got to worry about me, lad. Go on, have a kickabout with your mates." Throws me a football and then pushes me out the door. Nothing in the papers, never mentioned again. Friends whose parents are coppers aren't allowed to play on that side of the motorway anymore.
When I was a little boy, I lived in a small town about a 20-minute drive from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I went to a small Catholic elementary school. The priest at the adjoined school was a kind-hearted old Irish man, always bright and cheery, and friendly to the kids. However, it was a well-known fact that he was a firm believer in the occult. He had graduated from a seminary in Ireland, and there were rumors that he had been an active exorcist in his earlier years. One day, livestock and pets on the farms around town start showing up mutilated. I live on a farm around town. The men around town suspect coy dogs, coyote-dog hybrids, who are considered far more aggressive than coyotes or dogs. Kids in my class start losing pets. One kid describes a chicken he found in the woods behind his house with the eyes and beak removed and chest split open. Parents lock pets inside the house. My cat won't stop scratching at the door to be let outside, ignore it. Men, including my dad, around town decide to put an end to it. They go around town shooting the shit out of any canine that isn't leashed up. They kill tons of coyotes, feral dogs, and coy dogs. The men declare the mission a success. Next day at church, my dad is talking to the priest about the successful hunt. The priest, who is usually a bucket of smiles, goes cold and tells my father that he doesn't think that the problem is fixed. Get home from church, my dad says it's okay to let my cat out, do it. Cat stays out overnight. Nothing unusual. He liked to go kill shit at night. The next morning, I got up to go to school. My cat is dead. His head and arms had been removed and placed next to his torso. His abdomen was split open and his internal organs were placed to his other side. No bites. My dad blames the hillbilly kids who live closest to us, drives over to scream at them, only to find them bawling over their headless beagle. A few quiet days pass. Some kids don't go to school, but life is mostly normal. Playing in the field during recess out near the edge of church property. See friend hunched over something, poking it with a stick. Right at the line where church property ended and a field began, there was a disembodied goat leg. Tell the teacher. They say I shouldn't worry about it and to shut up. After school, my mom is late to pick me up. Go outside for fresh air. See the collared, cane-wielding silhouette of the priest standing alone in the distance, hovering over the goat's leg. That image always stuck with me. A few days later, a widower down the street burnt to death in his barn, unsure if related. I was deeply saddened over the loss of my cat, unnerved over the death of the widower, and terrified that whatever or whoever was killing everyone's pets would come for me or my family. Nightmares ensue, Mutilation, death by fire, big black dogs with red eyes, thin pale naked men with bloody knives and yellow eyes. The priest would always take time to talk to the kids if they were going through a rough time. My parents recommend I do it. Go talk to priest. He isn't his usual self. Nevertheless, he sits me down and tells me that there is evil in the world, and that whether man or the devil is responsible doesn't matter, and that I have to be brave in the face of evil. He assures me that the problem will go away very soon. Priest disappears for a few weeks. Teachers say he went to the Vatican. A few weeks into his absence, the mutilation stopped, almost immediately after the priest returns. He is smiling again, but he looks tired and older than I had ever seen him. He gives one last mass for St. Patrick's Day. We all must do our part to drive the snakes from our world, as well as from inside of our hearts. Priest announces he is retiring, leaves immediately. Priest dies in his home a few weeks later. One last weird bit. I went to the priest's funeral and it seemed like every religious leader in the entire county was present. Every Catholic priest, the bishop, a pair of rabbis, a Muslim, whatever you call them, and even a Sikh man were present. And they all looked more upset than I was.
Honor those that departed, fulfilling their duty. I'll just leave the warrior's prayer here. At any moment I may find myself in battle. However rigorous the task that awaits me, may I fulfill my duty with courage. If death should overtake me in this field, grant that I die in the state of grace. Forgive me all my sins, those I have forgotten and those I recall now. Grant me the grace of perfect contrition.
I have a few oddities. What sets my stories apart is that by small town, I mean super small. About 50 people in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. The three best-known stories of the town were the witch in the woods, the alligator man, and the dead railroad worker. The witch in the woods is pretty easy. Basically, some crazy hag lives in the forest. I've ventured out a few times to see if I could meet her. I found burned animal corpses, hung animal corpses, pentagrams, symbols, etc. She's probably just insane. I don't think a cult is involved, or I'd probably be a part of it considering everyone knows everyone in that small town. The alligator man is a bit stranger. I've seen him 3 times. The town is relatively close to swamps, and we've seen humanoid alligators. They're not quite humanoid, but close enough that if you saw the reptile stand, you would think it was a short, stubby man with the face of an alligator. I'm sure it's just an adaptation in nature, but it's really creepy to see. I've searched the internet for humanoid alligators, but all I get is dumb reptilian alien overlord bullshit. The last bit is the dead railroad worker. I've never witnessed it, but supposedly there was a train derailment in Georgia where a few people died. There was a worker who didn't instantly die, but instead screamed in intense pain before being put down by another worker. I've looked up some records on it, and it's all factual about the derailment, the worker, and him being shot. But I've never seen the ghost. A lot of my friends and family say they have, though. I've spent a lot of time looking for him, so I don't think he exists.
Not much in the way of my spooky stuff, but in the part of Kentucky where I live, there is a vast amount of corruption in local government. One instance that was widely reported and well known involved a local police officer who responded to a domestic violence call. The couple in question, however, was a former county prosecutor and his wife, a man this particular officer knew very well. The husband had been standing on the couple's roof in only his underwear, waving a shotgun around and threatening to kill his wife and himself. According to neighbors, the officer talked him down from the roof, but did not arrest him. Likely from fear of the repercussions of taking down someone as well connected as the former prosecutor was. Anyway, the wife was hysterical, but the officer left regardless. It was reported the next day that the former prosecutor did murder his wife and did blow his own brains out. The officer, who had been called out to investigate, was never reprimanded in any way and was not demoted or fired. I know this because 1, small town, and 2, my sister lives fairly close to him.
I was having a discussion about this just earlier today. Small-town government is obscenely corrupt. I work in the Missouri House and can tell you that there is considerably less corruption at the state level than at the local level. I live in a small town in Kansas. It's so small that there is nothing open past 9 p.m., and our Walmart is not a supercenter. My graduating class was 43 people, if that drives home how small it is. Every day there is new gossip about how corrupt the local government is, using taxes to fund trips to Vegas, amongst other things.
It's just really frustrating. I'm in college and I still can't get away from it. I hear things from friends all the time about money laundering and jail bonds of $5,000 or something for misdemeanors that get filed as $500 or less. It's just disgusting that anyone would take money from the town, seeing as it's in a perpetual state of decay. There is nothing redeemable about this place, and I have no idea how it still exists.
Yep. Dad got 2 DUIs like a week apart and only got 1 day in jail, no fine, and that was for the second DUI. All 'cause he was a city employee. Wasn't even mentioned in the paper, just swept under the table by the cops.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest, really. I was at a friend's apartment once a few years ago, and her brother had a warrant for his arrest over missing a court date or something. I remember it was nothing very serious, and 6 police officers with 6 separate cruisers showed up at the girl I was with's apartment, asking if he was there. 6. There are a lot of stories of police brutality in my town. Last year, a 16-year-old was beaten to death with flashlights after police found a bag of pot in his coat pocket. No federal investigation, no one lost their jobs, not a lot of coverage in the media. It was insane. It was someone I even went to high school with. Luckily for me, I was the son of a civil serviceman. That being said, I was never bad or had any trouble with the law and the cops, and even some city councilmen knew me by name. But kids I knew were getting hammered for misdemeanor shit I knew I would have been let go for. Kinda sad.
Small town in Oregon here. We have a few interesting things. Burial sites for Indians and pilgrims, old historical houses said to be haunted, a death of a student in the high school swimming pool, a gym now built above the empty pool. Personally, my favorite is the city beneath ours. Back in the day, the town had opium dens that housed Asians who did laundry or sold drugs. Basically slaves. Now the thing is, all the entrances are blocked off due to asbestos, or so they say. All of the old buildings downtown have an entry down there. There is even a metal plate on the sidewalk with stairs leading down but locked from the inside. It has 2 holes for lifting, and I looked through one. That's how I know they are stairs. What is odd is there is no record of what's down there. No pictures or documentation that can be found. But it was definitely there. I've been informed by older community members. Well, apparently a friend of mine was able to break in from an old abandoned building. He said there was waste from a plant our area once had, as well as creatures he couldn't even begin to identify or describe, as well as skeletons and old machinery or utensils. I'm not sure if they are trying to hide things or not.
Local kid who went to school with me worked on an anti-bullying DVD with 5 other people. He was nominated for a bunch of awards, invited to events, got given free gifts, stuff like that. Said kid got bullied terribly before the DVD was made, and afterwards he got bullied even harder. Got hospitalized a few times, ended up a mental wreck. Couldn't handle it. Took his own life. School destroys all trace of him ever being there. DVD's gone, pictures gone, awards gone, wiped his records, didn't even get in the yearbook. They just covered up the fact that they screwed up and let him get the shit beaten out of him, and it resulted in him taking his own life. Why? His death would tarnish the school's name, and they didn't want the media attention from it. It pisses me off big time that this actually happened. It's a small town, so it's unlikely anyone will care enough to do anything about this. I feel pretty terrible knowing that I sat back and did nothing to try and help him.
Try to find a copy of the DVD. Put it up on YouTube or something. You didn't get to help him while he lived, so maybe you can help him after he's gone.
I left the school years ago, and there's no possible way for me to find a copy of the DVD. I'm 100% sure that every last copy was destroyed anyway. I still talk to his friend Izzy occasionally, and she misses him big time. All of this shit happened around 2004-ish, if I remember rightly, yet she's still bothered by it. Taking your life does shit to people, man.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.